Okay, today I'm going to be talking to you about the ethical process of conducting interviews as part of your research development for research project. So many of you wouldn't have done an interview before, so this all might seem a little bit daunting and a little bit scary, which is understandable. Now, in terms of the actual questions themselves that you plan to ask your interviewee, that's something to discuss with your teacher. That's going to depend on your individual topic, where you need to get more information from in terms of your research question, etc. So this is something to talk about with your teacher before you organise and conduct the interview. This presentation is going to be about the interview process and going about that in an ethical manner before, during, and after the interview itself. Alright, so interviews are a wonderful research process to have in your folio. You can get expert opinions, you can get lots of really good findings in a relatively short amount of time. You should try and get at least one interview, but the more the better, depending on how much time you have. So there are three different types of interviews, as you can see. The first is a face-to-face interview. These are the most ideal type of interview to get, as you're more likely to get in-depth, reliable, and valid responses from your interviewee. It'll also boost your skills in conducting research, which is directly linked to the performance standards, so getting a wide variety of sources. A good face-to-face interview will feel more like a good conversation. So it won't be awkward, it won't have awkward silences, it'll just flow very well. It'll show that you're comfortable as well as your interviewee being comfortable. So the more comfortable you both feel, the more effective the interview is going to be. Now sometimes a face-to-face interview is not always possible due to distance or time restraints or timetables not syncing up, etc. That's fine. The next best thing is a phone or a Skype interview. You're still able to talk directly to your interviewee and get detailed, valid, and reliable answers again. So if you can't do a face-to-face interview for whatever reason, phone interview just as good. However, if neither of the above options are possible for whatever reason, the last resort is an email interview. Now, these are better than nothing, but email interviews, well, they're not really interviews at all. It's a question and answer. You also risk not getting in-depth answers, as there's nothing stopping your interviewee from giving very short, vague answers, and you don't really benefit from that source at all. So only do an email interview if a face-to-face or phone interview is not at all possible. Alright? Some of you might get one face-to-face interview, one Skype interview or phone interview, and one email interview, which is fine as well. But again, email interviews, try and avoid them if possible. Try and get a face-to-face or phone interview. Alright, now having said all this, you must consider your own safety when conducting interviews, as well as your potential interviewee's safety as well. We don't want you putting yourself in potentially unsafe scenarios purely for the sake of an interview. Alright, so for example, if your interviewee lives quite a distance away, we don't want you driving for hours on end at night or through bad weather, etc., or on your own just to have a face-to-face interview with them. Okay, that's not safe. It's not in your best interests. Now, keep in mind as well, guys, it is more than acceptable to take someone with you when you conduct a face-to-face interview if you don't feel comfortable. So often students go to a place of business to do their face-to-face interviews. However, some people's place of business is also at their private homes. Now, if this is the case and you don't know the person, and again, you don't feel comfortable with this, feel free to take someone with you so that your safety is protected. Now, this all might seem like common sense, but it's still important to consider this before you do any interviews. If you've still got concerns, discuss it with your research project teacher. Alright, you also need to be considerate of your interviewee's feelings and their well-being during this process. So many of you might have chosen sensitive or controversial or triggering topics, and whilst talking to certain people about their experiences might be extremely valuable to your research, the priority here is making sure that your interviewee feels comfortable talking about sensitive content. So you need to consider what we've got here. So their age, their gender, their culture, their background, their disability if they have one, or socioeconomic status, etc. And make sure that your questions are not discriminating, offensive, or accusing in any way. Again, if you have concerns about this, talk to your research project teacher. Okay, now gaining permission from your interviewee is essential to conducting ethical research. Even if you know the person, you have to get permission. So the starting point is often sending your potential interviewee an email to get permission to do the interview. So in this email, they have a right to know what your topic is about and why you're considering them as a possible source. So you can actually say here it is for the purpose of your Year 12 research project. Now in a separate video, I'll show you the templates that you can use for this initial email contact. Now you also need to tell your interviewee about what will happen to their responses after the interview has finished. So tell them what you plan to do with them, including, transcribing them, analyzing the responses, and using the interview to help answer your research question. They have a right to know what's going to happen afterwards. So once your interviewee has agreed to be interviewed, the next stage is setting up a day and a time to see or speak to them. Now, no matter what your topic is, it's always polite to also send your interviewee the questions you plan to ask them before doing the interview. This gives them time to think about their answers and not be caught by surprise. Again, it will also increase the likelihood of the interview flowing well, as they will again feel more comfortable giving you in-depth responses that will benefit your research, and they'll know what they're in for in terms of having an interview with you. Okay? Plus, it's very ethical and very polite to do this. Okay, so it is possible that some people may be happy to do an interview with you. However, they want their identity and their answers to remain anonymous. This is sometimes the case when sensitive or private information is discussed, and it's an important consideration when typing up and analysing your interview for your folio later on. In this case, you can give your interviewee an alias, so give them a false name with an asterisk next to it, or just write their initials when transcribing or referring to them. So ask your interviewee what they feel most comfortable with before formally starting the interview. Now, some interviewees will have no problem you using their name and it's all good, but give them the option, especially for those of you doing very sensitive or controversial topics. Now, often students record their interview on their phones, as most phones have this function. It's also a lot quicker and it can be more convenient than handwriting responses. But again, always ask permission to do this and explain the need to do this so you don't forget anything later on that's been discussed and you can transcribe it accurately. Again, it also allows the interview to flow much more smoothly, so you're not stopping and starting to handwrite answers all the time. Okay, so this is the file path to the permission slip templates in Community Files. I'll make another video showing these and going through these with you, but just for now, take note of that file path. Okay, it's very important to keep the information that you have gathered from your interviews confidential. So what this means is, well, it means several things. This includes the responses themselves, the interview's private details like their email, their work address, their phone number, etc. Do not discuss these details with anyone else other than the person themselves and your teacher when discussing it as part of your folio, obviously. It's not ethical to transcribe or post or discuss or use this information gathered for any other purpose other than for your research project. Alright, lastly, you must acknowledge your interviewee's responses if they helped you form new ideas, findings, detail for your research folio, outcome, and evaluation. So in other words, it's unethical to pass your interviewee's findings off as your own, as if it wasn't for them, you wouldn't have formed all these wonderful findings about your topic, so you need to acknowledge them accordingly. Your teacher will go through this with you in terms of referencing in much more detail in class. Okay guys, I really hope this helps. If you have any other questions, ask your individual research project teacher. Happy interviewing!